Hi, it's a pleasure to have you join us for this month's edition of Development Issues. My name is Zainab Sani. The Federal Ministry of Health announced Nigeria's first COVID-19 case in the month of February. And a month later, on March 29th, the federal government announced the total lockdown of Lagos, Abuja, and Ogun states as part of measures to curtail the spread of COVID-19. In a recent report, the National Human Rights Commission, a government agency, announced that during the lockdown period, there have been cases of extrajudicial killings. They mentioned in particular 8 incidents which had led to the deaths of 18 persons. Now joining us on development issues to look at how human rights has been affected, especially with the advent of COVID-19 and the need for lockdown in many countries across the world, including Nigeria, is Mrs. Osai Ojigho. She is the country director for Amnesty International Nigeria. And together we'll take a look at some of these issues to look at how the Nigerian government has fared in upholding human rights in Nigeria during the lockdown period. Thank you so much, Mrs. Osai Ojigho, for joining us on development issues this month. It's been a couple of busy months for you, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
so run us through what this past month have been like as it relates to the activities you carry out at Amnesty International and the fact that there have been cases, there have been alleged cases of human rights abuse in enforcing the lockdown. And I would also like you to evaluate how human rights has fared during this COVID-19 lockdown period in Nigeria.
Okay, thanks so much. It's been a very, will I say, engaged time, but also it brought to forth some of the things Amnesty International has been talking about over the years. And the main issue has been in terms of the way the police respond and the way they've implemented the COVID-19 interventions. One of the biggest issues has been a lot of complaint that came in regarding how people have been beaten, they've been shot at. Unfortunately, some people have lost their lives because police, in the guise of enforcing COVID-19 lockdown, has shot and killed people. But it's not only police. There have been other security agents, so we shouldn't just blame the police entirely. Depending on the location they were in or the incidents, have been involved in one form or the other of leading to unlawful killing of people. Another has been how the authorities have tried to maintain order. And we find that initially when the testing began for COVID-19, there was the risk of people who have not traveled, but who might have been in contact with people who have traveled, not getting access to the test. There was this impression that, oh, you must have traveled, so we'll give you the test, because of course there were not enough testing kits available. Failing to realize that these people have been in contact with other people. We know that things have evolved a bit differently since then, and we hope that things would reach the maximum testing capacity, which we actually need in order for us to quickly nip the COVID-19 pandemic in the bud. One thing that came out really strongly during the last few months has also been an increase in sexual and gender-based violence, rape in particular. And we find that these cases peaked during the COVID-19 lockdown. A lot of reasons have been given, but majority of it is the fact that there was restriction of movement. A lot of people were forced to stay where they are. A lot of people who go to work normally were now at home, working from home. And if you understand the way domestic violence works, domestic violence is something that happens in the home already normally. So COVID-19 restrictions just exacerbated existing domestic violence cases and brought to fore newer ones. If you were to talk to frontline providers, those that run shelters across the country, they'll tell you the number of calls they received during the COVID-19 lockdown spiked. So a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
think
issues.
was it Akwa Ibom or Anambra State that said that between in the last 3 months when the lockdown was put in place, they have received far more calls. I mean, almost triple the calls they usually receive, as against pre-lockdown period. And that is just painting the reality that it appears because people have more free time on their hand. I mean, is that what you're saying? That because people have more free time on their hand, that is causing the increase in sexual violence and all the rest?
No, it's not free time.
Okay.
COVID-19 only heightened what already was existing. So if, for
Oh, okay.
example, someone is already in a domestic violent situation, maybe they get beaten once a week or once every other time. When they were now forced to be in the same space with their abuser, 24 hours, 7 days a week, the increase in the number of beatings or attacks came about. Also, there were cases of, in terms of sexual and gender-based violence, there were cases of abuse with some people which were never pursued to the full letter of the law. When those perpetrators are in an environment where they have access to other people, there's propensity that they will attack again with the added assurance that the team cannot escape, because if you run out, then it means you have to end with the police or the army or any of the security agents, with the added assurance that the courts are closed. So who are you to report to? And there was also that provision that only people, in order to reach COVID, which is able, but what you need to look at it holistically. The police are not supposed to detain people except serious crimes like murder. So there were lots of things.
Sorry, allow me to interrupt you there. The pictures you are painting is a very sad one. Is that to say that it's been grim all around as it relates to the protection of human rights and freedom in Nigeria since the lockdown order was put in place?
The situation in the country has been grim for a while. And COVID-19 just is something that it's COVID-19, you could say, because of some of the interventions, led to some other abuses. But the situation did not improve or decrease because of COVID-19. The situation in Nigeria has been grim. And we're seeing it even when normally people are already at home, they're not supposed to be engaged. We still got journalists arrested, people still died. And these are cases that Amnesty had raised severally. And even if you were to look at our annual report for 2019, which we released the first week in April, you'll find that in 2019, we reported extrajudicial killings, we reported gender-based violence, those things are still happening in 2020.
Even now. Okay, now let's, like you already mentioned, Amnesty International has published a couple of reports, even especially during the lockdown order, on how human rights are being violated, and also on sexual and gender-based violence. How would you rate government's response? Are they responding to your reports? Are they taking necessary actions? How would you rate their response to the situation?
It's very interesting you ask that question. From where we sit, we know that they've noted complaints, because oftentimes you would see a rebuttal in the media, or they would hold sessions where they say that they are aware of this report. One instance where we know that they reacted was when Amnesty called for an independent investigation into allegations of crimes alleged against the military in their fight against Boko Haram. That led to the 2017 presidential panel to investigate that. Another was when Amnesty raised the issue about violence against women in Abuja and joined other civil society actors in the Abuja Raids network to call for an end to sexual and gender-based violence in Abuja and in Nigeria. That led to the National Human Rights Commission setting up an inquiry in order to look at what is the situation of SGBV in Nigeria, the existing laws, and why is it that a lot of security agents are involved in also violating these rights. So in that way, you can say they've responded to our reports. The other hand is in terms of some of the recommendations we give. So for example, we campaigned for the Anti-Torture Act to be a law that was passed in December 2017. We called also for investigation into allegations of rape in IDP camps. The Senate at the time in 2018 decided to set up a committee in order to evaluate the findings of that report. And then going further, just December 2019, Omowole Sowore, Bakare, and Abba Jalingo, a journalist from the South, were declared prisoners of conscience by Amnesty International. In December, the government released Sowore and Bakare in order for them to face their charges in court, right? And then later, and then in February, I think, of 2020, Abba Jalingo was also released on bail. They're still facing the charges, but at least they're no longer in detention. So our campaigns and research has gained some response from the government and has also thrown light into issues which they should be doing differently in that regard. But largely, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Okay, so I'm sure that there are standards on guiding the enforcement of the lockdown during the COVID-19 period, global standards. Can you tell us some of the standards, and if Nigeria as a country have been able to adhere to the standards guiding the enforcement of the lockdown?
I would want to take it from the point of view of human rights. Human rights is something that everyone has as a result of the fact that you are human and shouldn't be taken away from you. In Nigeria, for example, the human rights is contained in Chapter 4. The fundamental human rights is contained in Chapter 4 of our Constitution. And in Chapter 2, we have some rights that we call economic, social, and cultural rights. Overall, the international human rights standards are that human rights belong to everyone regardless of your status. But we understand during certain emergencies, including public health emergency, and COVID-19 pandemic is a public health emergency, certain rights can be restricted for the purpose of tackling such an emergency. So for example, the rights to liberty, the rights to movement can be restricted to a certain extent to ensure that they can intervene in a public health emergency. The standards are that any restrictions to these rights must be certain in law, so it must be legal. That means you need to pass a law or a regulation so people know what the issues are. It must be legitimate, it must be proportional. Proportional means that you cannot say because you want to fight COVID, then you use a sledgehammer to hit an ant. Whatever provisions you put must be commensurate to the action and the effect you want to achieve. And most importantly, it must be within a specific time frame. COVID-19 interventions are not meant to be permanent. They are not meant to be for a long time. They're meant to be temporary measures so that you can contain the situation and you are then able to begin to engage to alleviate some of the challenges that exist in the community. Nigeria as a whole started off by implementing the interventions on a public health emergency because we were ill-prepared. And then when I say we, I'm talking to the government, ill-prepared to tackle a public health emergency like this as a result of the fact that we already had a decaying public health system. The challenges were enormous from the beginning, and it almost seemed like as if we were not going to make it. So learning from this experience has grown to show that certain structures needs to be in place before we are able to be more responsive to these issues. There were lots of blind spots. The gender sensitivity that was required was lost. What needs to happen in terms of people who are vulnerable in society? So for example, if people lived on the streets and you're enforcing lockdown, stay-at-home orders, They are already living on the streets. Where do you intend to keep them? Health workers need PPEs, personal protective equipment, in order to work. How do you source these items now that things are closed? How do you invest to ensure that you can protect even those who are set to actually help you secure to combat the pandemic? So it brought up a lot of things which challenged and stretched the government, but it shows that because we already had a falling system health-wise, and we already had a poor implementation of human rights, even when even with the minimum restrictions that were there, things were bound to go wrong.
Okay, now for you as an individual, it's very glaring that you've been working a whole lot during this period, and I know that on a usual day, in usual times, your work would involve field activities. How has monitoring and evaluation of human rights been during this period? And have you at any point in time felt overwhelmed, especially as a woman? Yeah, that's been biased, but with the reports of sexual violence and abuse coming in and all of that, have you at any point in time felt like, no, this is just too much?
Yes, it's interesting you said that, because when we had a team meeting the other day, we were evaluating how have we been able to do our work under COVID-19 restrictions. A lot of our work involves field work, like you said. We've not been able to go anywhere really, because you can't go to states to check or verify information on the field. We've had to rely essentially on technology, phone calls, on partners and Amnesty supporters on the ground to say, okay, what exactly is happening? How can we get that information? And so it means that we are more plugged in than normally we would have been. I think that there's a lot of digital fatigue now, and also a lot of, at the same time, we're having to adapt to new ways of working in order to carry out our work. So the frustration is not being able to do it the way we normally would have, but having to rely on others and having to adapt and having to drop some issues because we cannot fully participate and see, and instead find alternatives for the people on the ground to work with. What would have been good is if they had given groups like us also that kind of pass as essential services, then that would happen. But we know that with the current appetite and the fears about monitoring the process, this is something that is not availed to us at this time. In terms of sexual and gender-based violence, it's been quite worrying. There are some cases that really shook me as a person and made me wonder whether all the work we've been doing is really reaching people. Because you do a lot of awareness, you raise campaigns, you do all of this, and then you hear the most horrific stories. And particularly the recent cases of Uwa, Barakat, and even more cases that came up just shows that we need to do a lot more, not just as organizations, but as individuals and as institutions across Nigeria to tackle this issue. It's a national emergency for gender-based violence that we're seeing right now. And we all need to play our part. The media, CSOs, the church, the mosque, schools, everyone has to play a role for us to be able to work together. COVID-19 just showed us that you can't be waiting for one NGO to help. Within your community, if there's no NGO, you guys are civil society groupings, in community groups, in faith-based groups, you guys should be able to organize yourself and act and monitor the authorities to make sure that they address the issues of gender-based violence and other human rights violations in the community.
Okay, let's take, I like that you mentioned the role of individuals, the role of communities in upholding human rights standards in Nigeria. It would appear that Nigerians are very fond of blaming authorities. Anything, it was the government that did it. It's the government's fault. Corruption, it's the government's fault. Human rights abuse, it's the government's fault. Almost as though the government is a separate world from Nigeria, or a separate country from Nigeria. Would you say that Nigerians are culpable in some of these accusations or activities? For example, sexual and gender-based violence, where you get families telling people not to report, or even human rights abuse, where the attempts to, people do not want to associate themselves with the situation and then try to hide information and all of that. How do you think Nigerians are that culpable, or they are being shaped by the existing rules in place that doesn't guarantee your freedom to even start with? Anything can happen to you. You can go and report a case now and you're locked up for the next 1 year.
You see, when we talk about the obligations of our government and why it might seem we're overly targeting government. Government is the institution that we have given the authority to keep us safe, to protect us, and in order to enforce that we all can live a fulfilled life. So when we talk about, and it's governments that also sign up to these international human rights treaties. So the direct responsibility falls on government. If someone hurts another person, government should step up to ensure that that person is punished. When that doesn't happen, it is the government that has failed us. It doesn't mean that the person didn't hurt you, but government has also failed to act in punishing that person. That said, a lot of the atrocities we're seeing talks about individual responsibility, often crimes, often these violations that occur. And this is where essentially we work on the person. Human rights education is a tool we use in order to share information about what human rights is, how you can campaign, how you can raise complaints, what you need to work. At the same time, the institutions, whether the security agencies, are populated by people. So how are those people trained? How are they given the tools they need in order to carry out their work? And so everything falls down back to the environment and back to a system of accountability that has been built over the years. Yes, individuals commit these crimes, but at the same time, it is the government and the institutions of government that are responsible for punishing them and should be in a place to create the avenue for those who have been victims to speak up. That said, it is important at a community level for those that have been pointed out and alleged to have committed these crimes to be allowed to face the course of justice. The major obstacle, like one of the things you mentioned, that families come and discourage someone from carrying out a complaint, is on one hand might be due to ignorance. That means they don't fully understand what rights the person has. The second is they look at the justice system and they say it's too long. And so they are like, we are not sure we can wait that long to get justice. And then the final stage is that they might also be facing threats themselves. It almost seems like we're going through an entire cycle, but we must never absolve the government of the international obligations to ensure everything works according to plan. And
so you're saying that at the end of the day, the burden of upholding human rights, both at the national and international level, falls on government?
It falls on the government, the obligation to enforce, the obligation to promote and to protect human rights.
I have two more questions before we round up. The first one relates to freedom of expression. I know that one of the basic human rights, or the fundamental human rights, is freedom of expression. But looking at the kind of fake news, the kind of, insightful statement, the kind of harmful statements people are making these days. Imagine someone saying that there's no COVID-19 and then encouraging others to violate COVID-19 safety protocols. Would you agree to, would Amnesty International and other human rights organization consider a society where somebody can be prosecuted and, tried and prosecuted for something they have said?
Freedom of expression is a fundamental human right, like you rightly noted. And the freedom to share a thought, an opinion, means that there'll be opinions you would share that people might consider unpleasant. It doesn't mean that that person doesn't have a right to hold it. I think we need to be very reflective when we call on certain restrictions to be made to fundamental human rights. Because oftentimes it's because people are uncomfortable about what has been said and not necessarily whether what was said is right or wrong, right? But that said, even within our law, we already have situations where they've envisaged that people might just be mischievous. They might want to just intentionally share information that could tackle people's reputation or which could interfere with an issue. That is why there is a civil option route where people can complain, okay, this statement that was made actually is an attack on my person and I want it remedied. And one way is to, of course, in the case of social media where a lot of these things happen, is to put out a disclaimer, to also write to the platform that hosts that particular social media account to say, this is what has happened, this is the issue I have with this particular message that has been shared, and to share that. To also take the route of suing the person. One of the things that Amnesty International and many groups that promote the right to freedom of expression does not support is criminal charges for someone expressing their opinion. You can go the civil route and ensure that the person is taken to task in terms of what they need to do. The danger, because people tend to say, oh, people say things that are careless, people say things that are whatever. The danger is if you try to attempt, which people have tried to, you are going to gag all speech. You're not going to, who will determine what is careless, who will determine what is insightful, who will determine what is hurtful, will depend on the person's perception, the person's position, the person's status. And we should never be in a position whereby because we do not like what somebody is saying, we shut them up completely.
Okay, and finally, our last question would also focus on human rights. What can we do to uphold, freedom of expression? What must we do rather to uphold freedom of expression in Nigeria, especially the average citizen out there?
I think the first thing is to recognize that every individual is different. We tend to think that everybody should think the same, agree the same. It's not like that. We're all different people and we would have different views and perceptions about what happens. What we need is an environment, a safe environment to share freely and to also exchange information and give information. And that's why it's something that we should preserve and protect very strictly, because it's highly subjective in terms of people deciding, oh, this hurts me, it may not hurt someone else. Also, we need to note certain democratic principles and values. And one of it is that people need to be heard, people need to share. And oftentimes, whenever an argument is put forth that you disagree with, it is left for you to bring up an argument to counter it. Shutting up people because you don't want to hear what they say does not cut it. And we should all operate within the law. The law is there to guide us. Oftentimes, the issue is that some people are treated much above the law. And we already see it, even with people that are complaining that, oh, people are complaining, people are abusing people on social media. If the person is saying something that is sweet to the hearing of someone in power, it's not a problem, even though that person that is sweet singing is also actually attacking and abusing someone else. But the moment someone else abuses the person in authority, they get very upset. Why? So it's double standards. We all should operate within the law, and then everything would work according to plan.
All right. So what do you look forward to doing right after the lockdown is lifted post-COVID-19?
I've been thinking about it. People say that they have a long list. I've been really thinking about it. Some of it are things I don't want to even say out now because people will be like, oh my God, what does that mean? But for me, I think it's just the fact that we need to, you know, that community feeling. Of course, you love your family, you're attracted to your family, but the fact that you can just go and visit a friend and have a nice meal together and just catch up and have a really nice hug would be something I would really appreciate. For me, it would be an opportunity to see my parents because they live in a different city, and just sit down with them and show them that we love them and that I really missed, you know, being with them during this time. That for me would be really useful because it's this digital, it just doesn't get it. They see you on the screen and they smile, but they're like, oh my God, I need to hold you and I need to see my
No
grandkids
hugs.
and no hugs. Yes, so that is something that I really want to do once I'm out here. And yeah, let's just celebrate life. For those of us that do make it out of COVID alive, we need to celebrate life, and we need to recognize that everyone is fighting their own little battle, and be more kind to one another.
All right, it's been such a pleasure having the country director for Amnesty International Nigeria, Osai Ojigho, and we had such an engaging conversation, as you can see. We look forward to having you on other editions of Development Issues, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
And that is it on this month's edition of Development Issues. I look forward to seeing you next month. My name is Zainab Sani.